It is a Thursday afternoon in the autumn of 1964, and a retired schoolteacher from Springfield, Illinois, is doing her weekly shopping at the local Sears Roebuck. She has a new ironing board cover in her basket, a packet of light bulbs, a tin of furniture polish. She turns into the back of the store toward the hardware section to find a replacement washer for the kitchen tap. And she stops so completely that the woman behind her walks directly into her basket. Behind the sporting goods counter, mounted on two wooden pegs on the wall above the ammunition shelf, is a machine gun. Not a hunting rifle, not a sporting shotgun, a belt-fed, water-cooled, .30 caliber medium machine gun. The same weapon that her son carried across the frozen ridgelines of Korea in the winter of 1950. The same weapon that her brother described in letters from the Pacific, that she still keeps in a shoebox, under the bed in the spare room. The perforated water jacket, the distinctive backplate with its twin pistol grips, the brass feed cover, the tripod mounted beneath it holding the whole assembly at counter height. The price card reads $10.95. She does not move for a long time. The ironing board cover and the light bulbs and the furniture polish sit in her basket. Other shoppers move around her. The store clerk behind the counter watches her with the cautious attention of someone who is not sure what the appropriate response is to a woman standing motionless before a machine gun in a Sears store in 1964. She asks him one question. Does it work? He tells her it does. She asks him to wrap it up. What this schoolteacher is taking home from Sears Roebuck on a Thursday afternoon in Springfield, Illinois, is the Browning M 1917-01, one of the most consequential automatic weapons in the history of modern warfare. 5 million Browning machine guns were built across every variant and every conflict. They changed infantry combat permanently and irreversibly. They ended up at Sears for $10.95. And then the law of 1968 ended it. This is that story. To understand why 5 million Browning machine guns ended up in Sears Roebuck stores, one must begin with the single most devastating tactical revelation of the First World War. The revelation that changed every assumption about how modern armies fought and died, and left the United States Army caught entirely unprepared. The machine gun had existed in practical form since Hiram Maxim demonstrated his recoil-operated design in 1884. By 1914, every major European army had incorporated machine guns into its infantry tactics in significant numbers. The German army entered the First World War with approximately 12,000 machine guns. The French army had approximately 5,000. The British Expeditionary Force had 2 machine guns per battalion. These weapons did not merely supplement infantry firepower. They defined the tactical landscape of the entire war, transforming open ground into killing fields that infantry could cross only at catastrophic cost, and making the defensive position so powerful relative to the attack that 4 years of industrial-scale effort produced a net advance measured in kilometres, rather than the decisive breakthroughs that both sides had planned for. The United States Army entered this war in April 1917 in a state of machine gun provision that bordered on the scandalous. American forces arrived in France with approximately 1,500 machine guns of various incompatible types, a figure representing roughly 1 machine gun per 660 soldiers, in a force that was eventually to number nearly 2 million men on the Western Front. French and British liaison officers reviewing American equipment states in the summer of 1917 produced assessments that were diplomatically phrased but unmistakable in their implications. The American army was going to war with virtually no meaningful automatic weapons capability whatsoever. The weapons that did exist in American service were each inadequate in specific ways. The Benet-Mercier automatic rifle, adopted in 1909, had demonstrated its limitations most publicly during the punitive expedition against Pancho Villa in 1916, when a squad of cavalrymen attempting to engage Mexican raiders at night found themselves unable to operate the weapon's complex strip-feed mechanism in darkness. An incident that became nationally reported and contributed to a congressional investigation into Army ordnance procurement that produced considerable heat and very little light. The Hotchkiss M 1914, obtained from the French, was adequate but dependent on French ammunition and French maintenance. The Vickers, obtained from the British, was excellent but similarly dependent on external supply. The requirement was unambiguous. The United States Army needed a water-cooled, belt-fed, medium machine gun that could be manufactured in American factories, fed by American ammunition, maintained by American armourers, and produced in the hundreds of thousands. It needed it immediately, and it needed it to work under every condition of mud and cold and mechanical abuse that modern warfare could impose. There was precisely one American designer whose record suggested he could satisfy all of these requirements simultaneously, and he had been working on the problem since before the Army formally issued the requirement. John Moses Browning had been developing automatic weapons since the 1890s, working from his workshop in Ogden, Utah, through his long and extraordinarily productive commercial relationship with Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut. His approach to the machine gun problem was characteristic of everything he designed, beginning not with the mechanism, but with the operational requirement, then working backward through the mechanical principles to the simplest, most reliable solution that those principles permitted. The result he brought to the Army's demonstration range at Congress Heights in Washington, D.C. on February 27, 1917, was a short recoil, operated, belt-fed, water-cooled design of remarkable mechanical elegance. When a cartridge was fired, the barrel and bolts recoiled together rearward for a short distance inside the receiver, approximately 14 millimeters, roughly the depth of a thumbnail, before the bolt was rotated to unlock from the barrel extension by a cam track machined into the receiver. The bolt then continued rearward alone, extracting and ejecting the spent case and cocking the firing mechanism, whilst the barrel returned to battery immediately. The return spring drove the bolt forward again, stripping the next cartridge from the fabric ammunition belt and chambering it with the precision that Browning's mechanism consistently achieved. The cycle repeated at approximately 450 rounds per minute, deliberate, controlled, and sustainable in a way that the higher-rate weapons of the period were not. The water jacket surrounding the barrel, a cylindrical steel container holding approximately 3.5 litres of water, absorbed the heat of sustained fire, boiling eventually, and producing the characteristic steam column that Browning gun crews learned to manage as a tactical signature that could betray their position to observant enemy soldiers. A standard water resupply, using the condensing hose attached to a collection can, could recapture a portion of the steam, reducing the frequency of replenishment. Under sustained fire, the water jacket could maintain barrel temperatures within acceptable limits for thousands of rounds, a capability that air-cooled weapons of the period could not approach. At the 27th of February 1917 demonstration, Browning's prototype fired 20,000 rounds without a single malfunction. The Army board members, who had arranged their afternoon to accommodate the expected series of stoppages and explanations, sat in complete silence. They had witnessed something unprecedented. Formal adoption followed within weeks. Production of the model 1917 was contracted to Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford, to Remington Arms Company in Ilion, New York, and to the New England Westinghouse Company in Springfield, Massachusetts. Total production of the M1917 reached approximately 56,608 weapons before the armistice of November 1918, enough to equip the American expeditionary forces in the field and demonstrate the design's combat effectiveness, but a fraction of what the Army had hoped to deploy. The interwar years brought refinement rather than revolution. The improved M1917 A1, standardized in 1936, incorporated a more robust tripod of improved design, modifications to the feed mechanism that increased reliability with varying ammunition types, and various detail changes that reflected the lessons of wartime service. The Saginaw Steering Gear Division of General Motors in Saginaw, Michigan, became the primary wartime producer of the M1917A1, eventually manufacturing the weapon in numbers that its First World War production had not approached. Rock Island Arsenal in Illinois contributed additional output. The M1919 series, an air-cooled variant of the same basic mechanism, developed for vehicle and aircraft installation where the weight of water cooling was impractical, added enormously to the total Browning production figure. Estimates of total production across all Browning machine gun variants, M1917, M1917A1, M1919A4, M1919A6, and aircraft variants across both world wars The Korean War and post-war manufacture for Allied nations reach 5 million when all sources are consolidated, though the precise breakdown across all manufacturers and all periods is not uniformly documented in publicly accessible records. The complete M1917. A one-system, receiver, water jacket, backplate and tripod, weighed approximately 47 kilograms, including a full water jacket and a basic ammunition load. It was not a weapon one man could employ alone. It required a crew of 3 to 6, operating with the practiced teamwork of men who had trained together on a weapon whose weight and complexity rewarded coordination. In combat, the Browning M1917I. 1 provided the sustained automatic fire that American infantry tactics had been organised around since the hard lessons of the Western Front had been absorbed into doctrine and training. At Belleau Wood in June 1918, Marine Corps units equipped with the original M1917 Browning used the weapon's sustained fire capability to break successive German counterattacks with a consistency that bolt-action rifles could not have provided. The Marine commander at Belleau Wood, Major General James Harbord, described in his after-action reports the role of the Browning machine guns in holding the wood's eastern edge against German forces that outnumbered his Marines significantly. The water-cooled weapon firing hour after hour through the summer heat, whilst German infantry attempted to dislodge positions that automatic fire made untenable to attack. On Peleliu in September and October 1944, Marines of the 1st Marine Division, operating M1917A, won positions in the coral ridges of the Umabrogol Pocket, used the weapon's water-cooled sustainability to maintain fire through Japanese counterattacks that came at night with the regularity of military doctrine. The coral terrain of Peleliu provided natural firing positions from which the Browning's sustained fire capability, the ability to fire continuously for far longer than any air-cooled weapon, was more valuable than any other characteristic. Veterans of Peleliu described the water jacket steaming visibly in the tropical heat and night, a column of vapour that had to be managed and sometimes suppressed by reducing the rate of fire, but which indicated that the weapon was functioning as designed. In the Hurtgen Forest from November to December 1944, American soldiers used M1917A1 positions to anchor defensive lines in conditions of rain and mud and cold that defeated most other mechanical systems they carried. The water-cooled mechanism proved paradoxically more tolerant of the extreme cold than air-cooled alternatives in sustained defensive use. The water jacket insulating the barrel from the temperature extremes that caused metal components to contract and mechanisms to bind. Veterans of the Hurtgen described holding positions overnight in temperatures below freezing with the Browning as the one weapon they could rely upon to function at first light without preliminary warming. At the Chosin Reservoir in November and December 1950, the M1917A1's last major combat deployment, crews maintained fire in temperatures that fell below -30 Celsius during the encirclement and breakout that became the defining event of the Korean War for the Marines and soldiers who survived it. The water jacket presented a specific challenge in these temperatures. Water freezes, and a frozen water jacket is useless. But experienced crews had learned to maintain a small amount of antifreeze in the jacket during cold weather operations, a solution that preserved the weapon's cooling function, whilst preventing the jacket from becoming a solid block of ice. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The comparative record of the Browning M1917A. A1 against its principal adversaries and allies reveals both its genuine strengths and the limitations that post-war analysis has identified. The German MG42, the weapon that Allied soldiers called Hitler's buzzsaw for the distinctive tearing sound of its 1,200 rounds per minute cyclic rate, represented the opposite philosophical extreme from the Browning's measured 450, where the Browning was designed for sustained, controlled fire that could be maintained indefinitely with proper water management. The MG42 was designed for the maximum possible volume of fire in the opening seconds of an engagement, accepting the logistical burden that its ammunition consumption imposed. A full 250-round belt through an MG42 lasted approximately 12 seconds at cyclic rate. The same ammunition through a Browning lasted approximately 33 seconds, nearly 3 times as long, producing a sustained fire capability that the German weapon simply could not match. The practical tactical implications of this difference depended entirely on the nature of the engagement. In the offensive ambush role, the MG42's rate of fire was devastating. The volume of fire in the first seconds could suppress a larger force before it could react. In the defensive sustained fire role, holding a position against repeated attacks over hours or days, the Browning's water-cooled sustainability was a significant advantage. The Hurtgen and Chosin experiences were both fundamentally defensive, and in both cases the Browning's sustained fire capability proved more valuable than the MG-42's higher cyclic rate would have been. The German MG-34, which preceded the MG-42 and remained in service throughout the war, fired at approximately 900 rounds per minute, from a 50-round belt or 75-round drum. Faster than the Browning but slower than the MG-42 and considerably more expensive to manufacture. The MG-34's precision machining requirements meant that German factories could produce approximately one MG-34 for every two MG-42s, a production penalty that became increasingly significant as the war progressed and German manufacturing capacity came under sustained Allied bombing. The British Vickers gun, derived from the original Maxim design and also water-cooled, also belt-fed, also firing at approximately 450 rounds per minute, offered the most direct comparison to the Browning M1917A1. The Vickers had been in continuous British service since 1912 and had accumulated an operational record that was, by any measure, extraordinary. The demonstration of sustained fire capability at the Battle of High Wood in August 1916, 10 Vickers guns firing 1 million rounds in 12 hours of continuous operation to support an infantry assault, remains the benchmark against which all subsequent medium machine guns are measured. The Browning, newer, and with a shorter operational history, could point to no single comparable demonstration, though its performance in Korea, particularly at the Chosin Reservoir, established its credentials for sustained fire under extreme conditions beyond any reasonable doubt. The post-war disposal of Browning machine guns followed the established pattern of American military surplus, from frontline service to reserve storage to commercial channels as newer designs replaced them in active units. The M60 general-purpose machine gun, entering service in the late 1950s and offering the combined sustained fire and mobility advantages that neither the heavy M1917A1 nor the lighter M1919 could individually provide, effectively ended the water-cooled Browning service life in the American Army. Sears Roebuck, whose catalogue and retail stores reached into virtually every corner of American life by the 1960s, from the largest cities to the smallest rural communities, became one of the prominent retail faces of the surplus Browning trade. The company's sporting goods sections had long stocked hunting rifles, shotguns, and ammunition, and the addition of surplus military weapons to that inventory was a commercial extension that Sears pursued with the same matter-of-fact efficiency it applied to every other product category. The $10.95 price for a complete M1917 A1 was, by any rational analysis, an extraordinary transaction. The weapon had cost the government considerably more to manufacture. It had served American forces through 2 world wars and a police action in Korea. It had been maintained in arsenal storage at public expense for years before appearing on the Sears counter, and now it was available, machine gun, tripod, water jacket, and brass feed cover, for $10.95 to anyone who walked into a Sears store and asked for it. The schoolteacher from Springfield, Illinois, who asked if it worked and then asked to have it wrapped, was not unusual. Veterans bought them with the particular satisfaction of reacquiring something they had carried into combat. Collectors bought them as historical artifacts of the First Order. Farmers bought them because a belt-fed, water-cooled machine gun was, in certain specific agricultural situations involving large predators, a practical solution to a practical problem. The transactions were entirely unremarkable. They were commerce. The Gun Control Act of October 22, 1968, ended the Sears machine gun counter as completely as it ended every other surplus military firearms transaction in American retail. The price card was removed. The surplus pipeline closed. The weapons already sold remained exactly where they were, legally owned and legally kept under the provisions of the National Firearms Act registry. A transferable registered M1917A, 1 Browning machine gun, on today's collector market, commands between $15,000 and $40,000, depending on condition and provenance. The $10.95 Sears purchase has become, through the compound arithmetic of federal legislation and 6 decades of collecting, one of the most consequential casual commercial transactions in American history. Return to that Thursday afternoon in Springfield, Illinois. Return to the schoolteacher standing before the Sears sporting goods counter with her ironing board cover and her light bulbs and her furniture polish. She's thinking about her son on a Korean ridgeline in 1950. She's thinking about her brother's letters from the Pacific in the shoebox under the spare room bed. She asks one question. Does it work? He says it does. She asks him to wrap it up. $10.95 for the machine gun that held the line at Belleau Wood and Peleliu and Chosin and every other place where American soldiers needed automatic fire to survive. And the Browning provided it without question and without failure. 5 million Browning machine guns were built. They served through 2 world wars and a war that was called a police action and changed nothing about what it asked of the men who fought it. They ended up at Sears for $10.95. And then the law changed and the price cards came down, and the machine gun that John Browning demonstrated without a single malfunction in 20,000 rounds became something that no one would ever again find between the ironing board covers and the light bulbs. The schoolteacher from Springfield asked one question. Does it work? It always worked. That was precisely the point.